I'll just go Control L, and then you up and down on the up and down arrows.
Cool.
Thanks, Jane.
Thanks, John. All right. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Okay, today I'm going to talk about quality assurance and my experience with quality assurance over the years. So I guess I thought I'd put together a couple of definitions to start with. So the maintenance of a desired level of quality in a service or product, especially by means of attention to every stage of the process or of delivery or production. So quality assurance is a way of preventing mistakes. Sorry, there's just some noise. So quality assurance is a way of preventing mistakes and defects in manufactured products and avoiding problems with delivering solutions or services to customers. So the key standard involved here is ISO 9000, and it's part of quality management focused on providing confidence that quality requirements will be fulfilled. Okay, so I think when we started looking at automation of systems and early automation of systems, I think IBM said were well known for sort of saying that machines should work and people should think. And I think that's, I guess, one of the ways that I think in my experience quality assurance has been really effective. So it sort of cues me when I really need to start thinking about what I'm doing and making sure that I'm on task and that I'm following the process within an office. So I guess here the Jetsons had this vision of the future where robots did the heavy lifting to give humans time to dream up new ideas. And I think a lot of those sort of ideas are pretty relevant still today when we're going more and more towards various sorts of automated systems. Today I'm going to show you some of the QA system that I used to use in the office and that I developed in the office that I worked in. But I suspect more and more you guys, as you work through, will be working with a lot of automated systems. But you need to make sure that the automated system that you're developing is actually giving you the quality assurance that you're going to need. And I guess quality design and manufacturing processes are often associated with these sorts of mass-produced objects, like the Jetsons' kind of spacely sprockets. But I think in our world, we're looking for quality assurance to give us a really great process that we can follow, but that's going to deliver a different design outcome in every single case. And so that process needs to be pretty clear and careful, so that we feel like we can produce reliable results for our clients. So I think one of the big first things that you might notice is it's actually not about quality. It's about professional qualifications. It's about really good planning. It's about assurance, and it's about producing evidence. So most quality systems are about producing evidence that you're appropriately qualified, you plan to do something, and you can assure someone else that you did that thing by producing some evidence. So the quality bit, I guess, comes in under this sort of the basis that you're appropriately professionally qualified. And I guess I'll talk about that a little bit later on in the talk today. The assurance is about planning to conduct your work in an orderly way so that you can meet your professional responsibilities. And the evidence, so proving or providing evidence that you followed your plan and you met those professional responsibilities. Most quality assurance systems include these key elements. So Identifying the organisational goals, identifying the critical success factors, identifying internal and external deliverables. So what we're going to deliver within our organisation, what kind of hold points they might be, as well as those external deliverables and what hold points might be involved there. Incorporating customer feedback, implementing continuous improvement, selecting quality management software or systems or processes, and there's a lot of commercial systems that are available out there, and measuring results. So I guess firstly you've got to identify the market and the clients that you want to work with, and identify your organisational goals, defining how employees' jobs are tied to your company goals. And so you've got to hire, part of the quality assurance system is that, you know, depending on the scale of work that you want to work in, your quality assurance system might need to be more detailed. All right, so like really large-scale public work is going to need a more comprehensive sort of system than if you're working on smaller-scale domestic work for smaller clients. And so identifying the organisational goals and the types of employees you're going to have within that organisation, and I guess that goes to what kind of professionals you're going to have within your organisation who you can allocate tasks and set up those roles and responsibilities within your organisation. Okay, so identifying critical success factors. So well-designed process for producing really great products, internal and external review and hold points. All right, so that each one of those hold points we can check that we did the checking and check that we produced the evidence and check that we're producing a quality product. Yeah, so there's often a series of checklists involved in quality assurance systems. And I will show you one of those in a minute. So identifying the internal and external deliverables. So this could be kind of how a team works together within your organisation. So there might be a series of roles and responsibilities. There might be responsibilities that the project team members might undertake. There'll be roles and responsibilities that are undertaken by the project architect, project director, quality assurance manager, but also who's responsible at which stage. And so you might even have a project architect, and you guys probably work in these sort of situations, where there might be a project architect who's responsible for the design phase of a project, and there'll be a different project architect who will be responsible for the documentation phase of a project. Okay, so clearly identifying who's got what roles at what part of the process and who's taking responsibility for producing the evidence that you've done what you said you were going to do. Okay, customer feedback loop. Well, the customers and I guess the customer can be many people in our sort of context. So the customer could be you, the project architect, working to the project director. So the customer could be our internal product production, but it could also be working for the builder, the products required that we need to deliver to our consultants so that they can do their work, as well as our client. So don't just sort of think about the customers as the client. There are many customers who you are delivering your product to as an architect. Okay, and incorporating that customer feedback so that we avoid making the same mistakes twice. And I'll show you that in a little bit of detail how we used to address, making mistakes. Making mistakes is okay in an organisation. We try and reduce how many mistakes we make, but I guess it's what you do to make sure that you don't make that mistake again, and how you rework the system to make sure that you don't make those mistakes twice. Okay, and so implementing continuous improvement. So as part of your post-occupancy or your job wrap-up, there should be a process which feeds back into your quality assurance system so that all the mistakes you guys make are feeding back into that system and improving it as you move forward. Okay. Now, you can, in today's context, you're probably not working with paper quality assurance products. You're probably working with software, but it's really about the system that you select. And I guess quality assurance systems, a lot of the systems that are available on the market, they're about producing lots of paper as a way of demonstrating you've done what you said you were going to do. And as architects, we're like, actually, I like to produce drawings, and I don't really like to sit there checking off checklists, and I don't like to produce lots of extra paper or extra processes. So the best kinds of systems they are going to follow your workflow, and they're actually going to reduce the amount of anxiety, stress, and paperwork that you've got in the office. So I guess, and I guess is why I was talking to John the other day, and why he asked me to come and talk to you as a young architect. You know, pretty gung ho and pretty keen. And I'd been registered for a little bit, and I was keen to get the promotions and things. Anyway, one of those pay rises came with the new title as Quality Assurance Manager. And I was like, sweet, nice pay rise, excellent, that sounds pretty good. And then I got this huge binder dumped on my desk with thousands of forms and all this paperwork that I perhaps hadn't seen very much of in my other role, and it was like, you have to make sure that everybody in the office follows all of these things, and you have to train people to use this thing. And I was like, this is the worst thing I've ever done, and I need to design a better system. And so I spent about a year on and off working through what we really needed to do, and working through, I guess, the most streamlined way that we could meet the requirements of the Australian standards, we could meet our client requirements, and we worked a lot for government and military, SC government, local government, federal government, and so we needed to work with what they needed from us. But we just wanted to do our work that we like to do, which is drawing drawings, and so my process was kind of largely based on that. And so we developed our own system, which was sort of easily translatable into it was kind of like a software from back then, because it was all digital. Okay, and then measuring results. So measuring results with the customers, internal and external deliverables, with the community and regulatory bodies, and winning more work is often a good measure. So if you keep getting return work from those clients, it's a pretty good measure, and in a lot of architectural offices, that's been one of the ways that we measure. Okay. All right. So this is the example that I developed. It had 3 parts. Was 3 A3 sheets of paper was the whole system. So I went from this kind of, well, they had the quality assurance managers like binder, and then everybody's office binders, which was, you know, like this thick as a binder, and like 3 reams of paper, and we went down to 3 pieces of paper. So first was the quality manager's roadmap. Then was the A3 project drawing folder with checklist. And then I just had a number of digital templates. And if you use the templates to communicate with whoever you're going to communicate with, then you met the requirements of the system. So the quality manager's roadmap to ISO 9000. So what I decided is that rather our old system had been set up to make it easy for the auditor to find the information. And so they, as a bureaucratic kind of a person, said, oh, well, the easiest way to prove that we've done everything we said we were going to do is to get us as architects to fill out thousands of forms. And I said, well, that's a really dumb way. I think what I'd rather do is do the work that we always do and get the quality manager to kind of to find a roadmap, I guess, or develop a roadmap to show them where in our system we produce the evidence for the quality system. So that was the kind of the basic idea. And so where the evidence can be found by the auditor. So basically, I had a series of elements. So you've got the ISO 9000 criteria over on this side. And, you know, criteria, whatever it is, 7.1. And then over on this side, it'll tell you where in our system you can find the evidence that we met that particular thing. And so you make the auditor do a bit of hunting around instead of us as employees running around producing extra work for ourselves. So that was the idea. And then we had the A3 drawing folder with the checklist. And previously, you know, every employee used to have this quality binder on their desk, and it would normally get buried under all of the drawings and it would never be seen and wouldn't be used. And instead, I put the quality system in the drawings so that you had to pretty much move the sheet of paper that had your quality system out of the way to be able to see your drawing, right? So it was in constant use. And we ended up having to laminate them because it was, you know, or to work with something to help, because they would always get trashed because they were in so much constant use and they helped with our processes. So that was the sort of basis. So in the binder, we'd have sheet 1, sheet 2, and sheet 3. Sheet 1, when you're starting up and setting up your project, it was really useful. So it had the project setup, your design studies, your brief and agreement, PSP, FSP, authorities and documentation. Page 1 had your general overview. Page 2 had your design through to documentation. And page 3 had your documentation review and your audit. So in most project binders, this one would be actually on the front cover because it was in the highest use while we're kind of designing. All right, so the project drawing folder was about kind of moving through each one of the design phases. So page 1, as I said, it had the general overview of all of the office systems. It had office policy, organisational goals, expectations and responsibilities of working with a client, expectations of working with subconsultants, professional development policies, OH&S policy, management structure, file structure, standardised drawing naming conventions, and drawing title blocks. So I'll just go through that in a little bit more detail. So we had the simple file structure for all physical and digital documents, so that when you opened a job file, always in folder. Every folder had a specific element. So the project file would always be A, the client file would be B, consultants would be C, and authorities would be D. All right, and you'd have every single job. If you wanted to know, the consultant agreements or all of the discussion backwards and forwards with the consultants, you would know exactly where to find it. Every job had a standard filing structure, and the naming conventions for the file, for every single file, had to include the job code, what folder it was in, and a reverse date. And so the reverse date was actually the first part of the code, And that allowed you to, everything in that folder, you could just sort it, and that would mean that the most recent information or the most recent discussion would be at the top. And also all of our folders, our physical folders where we printed stuff out, was oldest at the back, newest at the top. And so always, if you know you had to go back, you'd go to backwards in your folder, and the newest discussions and things were at the front. So everything was about standardising all of those processes for every single job. We also had version control naming conventions, so we weren't, you're not making that up on a job by job basis. And every job was the project folder structure was based on the biggest kind of jobs that we would normally do. Okay, so it worked quite well in terms of its scalability. We also had, for the drawings, they had a particular naming convention when they were at PSP. The naming convention would change for FSP, and the naming convention would change for documentation, so that you knew at what stage that drawing was in. And floor plans were always in the 101 series. Elevations and sections are always in the in the 20s. All the detail drawings were in the 30s, whatever. And so you'd always be able to find the drawing that you're looking for in terms of the naming structure and the coding. We also then had templates for all of the documents. And you could find that on that first sheet what the templates would be and what folder they were going to be in. So you'd pretty much rock up, day one in the office, and you'd know where to find all of the documents and which documents you're supposed to be using based on that first sheet. Whoops. Yeah, and the templates referred to on the checklist. The checklist follows the actual workflow, and the templates were about streamlining the workflow. So, your boss says to you, oh, you've got to write an FSP report. You're like, what do I need to put in an FSP report? Well, you just open up the FSP report template, and inside the template it would have the instructions in each section, what you need to, at the minimum, fill out. And then, you could pad that out with other information that was really job specific. And so it sort of gave you a bit of a confidence that you knew what you were doing. It also included instructions for file backup. So file backup, I guess file backup in my office was pretty serious business. We used to have a series of backup drives that would go home with people at the end of the day, and so that we had an off-site backup and an on-site backup, and then we would also have fixed regular monthly backups in case someone accidentally deleted a whole folder and we didn't realise, and we just kept backing up over the top of that. So we'd also have these kind of point in time ones that wouldn't get overwritten. And that's because my boss, previous to when I was working with him, it was actually a paper office. It was back in the olden days, and they had a paper office, and you would have to create die-line copies of the drawings that you're working with, and you would take them off-site and you'd put them in a storeroom at the end of the week, right? And luckily he was actually doing that because his office burnt down and they lost all of the drawings, but luckily he had a backup system, and they only lost a week's worth of work, and they were able to just launch back in and keep doing the work. So having lost everything once, he was pretty focused on making sure. And I guess that's always what you should consider with your backup system. How often should you back up? It's, well, how much work do you want to have to redo? And if you don't want to have to do very much work, then you should have a pretty comprehensive backup system. And I think that like a triple backup in today's context, there should be a backup in the cloud, there should be a physical backup, one on-site and one off-site at a minimum, so that you can always recover that data. All right, so the brief agreement and design phase. So that was sort of in the A3 folder, and that was this main job sheet, and that dealt with some project setup, design studies, brief and agreement, design stages, authorities, and documentation. Right, so everything that you needed to do for those stages. You'd need to get some basic things happening, like get your job and register it on the job register. Prepare a submission. The submission needed to include some key things like which consultants we need to work with, setting budgets, confirming that everybody's skill sets are appropriate, fee schedules, demonstrating our practice experience, obtaining and reviewing whatever the client contract documents were, and selecting the appropriate engineers. We'd then have to work through brief and agreement, and as you probably are aware, you often get a brief from a client, and you need to give the client a return brief, because often their brief and their budget don't match. Often their brief, it's hard for a client to actually visualise what they really need without the services of an architect. All right, so part of that brief and agreement stage is about making sure that you've that the brief that they're given you is works in terms of the budget, checking if there's been any previous design work that's been done by either in-house or by anybody else, and making sure that their contractual obligations and payments have been met before we're engaged. So there's a number of things, just making sure that we've worked through those kind of key issues. Then we have design, so roles and responsibilities, templates, and design stage reports. So at each kind of stage of the project, we'd work through and reviewing authority approvals, making sure that you include your changes to the brief in your design stage report. And so if you include your changes to your brief and your budget in your design stage report and your client then approves it, you're pretty sweet to keep going, right? But if you haven't got those things approved and ticked off by the client, and they're in separate documents, or they haven't been formally approved in writing, then that's where you're going to come into trouble, and you're going to end up in court. And so we just had, even when the client didn't require design stage reports, we would collect all of those documents anyway, and we would produce a short report that included those minimum requirements that we needed to assure ourselves that we weren't going to end up in court, and that we were going to be fine, and in fact really fine. The client's going to be fine, and they're going to hire us again next time. Okay, so office templates, I guess, you know, whatever sort of graphics are appropriate. As I said, in our some basic kind of template information that we kind of had was this sort of the title of the project, the client contact details. We would often include the client who was the approver. It's kind of like a rookie mistake that you go in and you meet with the client and they all say, yeah, this is all great. And then you discover that they're not actually the person who's signing off on the project, and you haven't presented to them, and you also don't have approval from the person who's meant to be the approver. Okay, so just sort of ticking off those basic things. It seems like pretty basic stuff, but it means that you sort of, you know, you get to stay out of court a lot more often. And so working with some templates that, you know, define changes to the brief, define all significant design changes, and so that you've got that in writing as well as on the drawings that you're including in the report. And there's a bunch of stuff, other stuff in there as well. So we would include some reporting on services, facilities for people with disabilities, what else? Consultation with authorities. All of that information would get included in the report. And I guess there would have been some instances where you go, oh, I have to fill this out the report, and you go, I haven't done it. But that's why the process is so important, because it makes sure that I guess you can't forget anything, right? And it helps you to sleep a lot better at night. Okay, so we also had a list of authorities, and we just had this basic checklist of the authorities that we always used to go and see all the time, like Australia Post and asbestos check and all of those things that we'd had issues with before. Where have we got here? The OH&S, occupational health and safety and work cover. And I ended up having to work on a job that was solely because that hadn't been done on a previous job. And so all of these ladders had been installed on a roof that didn't have approval and didn't have sign-off. And so we had to go and rip down all of these ladders and make new ladders that complied with their requirements. The ladders had originally complied with the standard, but hadn't been signed off. And later on, they wouldn't sign them off. And so, big mistake. It's on the checklist. And really that's the idea, so that nobody else has to go back and pay for a whole pile of new ladders on a roof somewhere again. Okay, so those sorts of things would happen. Often you'd say, oh, it's not required for this project, not required for this project. But sometimes there'd be sort of obscure kinds of things you'd need to work through, like, gosh, the College of Surgeons might want to look at it. There'd be that are industry-based organisations that would want to come and give approval. Otherwise, they're industry people who are members of their professional body might sort of say that they might not use it. And so unions often will be part of that as well. The post office get really thingy about how you design the post boxes in the unit developments, and you're probably familiar with that. So construction phase. So same as before with the design stage reports and using the minute template and design stage report templates. When you're in the construction phase, we would still do regular construction reports and minutes of meeting using our template. And that meant that we were checking off on all of the things that we needed to in terms of making sure that we'd met our professional responsibilities, including things that were still happening in the construction phase. And probably all of you were working in offices on fast-track projects. There's still changes to the brief happening in the construction phase, and you need to report on that so that when you're not at the end, you're at the end of the building handing over and they say, oh, there's supposed to be 2 bathrooms and I only got 1. And you're like, but we remember that bit where we signed off on that. And so those construction stage reports are really important for that. This is really important part, which is that production and review stage. Was a design and documentation review, project audit, and documentation checklist. Now, design and documentation review and the project audit, we would have a project director review the documents. They're really reviewing the checklist and they're reviewing the drawings to see that the project architect had signed off on each one of the key points, saying, yeah, I've done that, and I've done that. And so the project director, they have some confidence in the staff working for them that they've been through and they've followed the kind of process. And also the project audit, which would be conducted by the QA manager. who would come in and say, yeah, you use the templates, so therefore we're covered and we haven't created some big risks for ourselves as a company. And I think Paul's talking about risk this afternoon. Yeah, so this is about reducing risk. All right, and so checking that the process has been followed and the evidence has been produced right throughout a project. So, yeah, it's really giving us confidence. So in today's context, and I know we used to do this a lot, we might have someone working on the design phase. So I might be the project architect up to middle of FSPs, and then someone else in the office is going to take that over for documentation. Now that, is sort of taking the project from one end of the office up to the other end of the office. And of course I'm still going to be involved in that somewhat, but I'm not going to be hands-on checking through the checklist and making sure that things have been done, all right, on a day-to-day basis. So someone else needs to take that over. If I, go into a healthcare context, I think, hospitals have got systems in place these days when, one nurse goes in and she sort of says, well, I checked the blood pressure and I checked the, whatever, I don't know, the temperature and what have you. And then the next nurse needs to go in and check the blood pressure and the temperature. And she also has to sign off that the nurse before her checked the temperature and the blood pressure. All right, so nobody's going to die. And if that person before didn't do their job, then the second person has to report it. Now, when you're handing over projects, that's also something that you really need to sort of think about, and the system needs to account for you being able to hand that project to someone else. You might get a new job, you might change firms. In today's context, we've also got, one firm doing the design and another firm doing the documentation. So particularly when you're picking up someone else's design and you're documenting, you've got to have systems in place that allow you to go back and make sure that they did what they were supposed to do in their part of the project. So that there's kind of a handover in the system. So yeah, so that you're not making the same mistakes twice. And I think, yeah, classic ones that are mistakes that are often made, work by others, not included in the contract, and then having that accidentally costed, or not having the right kind of contractual relationships set up for work that's being done that's not included in the contract that you're working on. Bird proofing, and had a bunch of projects go really badly astray after construction because of birds. Like on ANU campus, they've got like a duck invasion, and so now I had to do all this research about how to get rid of the ducks, because I designed this whole entry that you walk over the water, and then they were like, well, you can't have the water. So disaster. So thinking about bird proofing really a lot earlier on in the process, and making sure that you're cool with the duck invasion at ANU. And then this one here, some really simple things, and you think, I'm working in CAD. How could I stuff up how many treads and rises there are in a stair? Well, it can happen. And it did happen. Happened on one of my really early jobs. I stuffed it up in major way, and it ended up on the checklist because it was for these guys at the end of their parade ground. It was for their stair that they were going to all march up on their march past parade out at Duntroon, and I hadn't numbered my treads and rises on both the section and on the plan, and I had one less tread than I needed, but then I'd also done the slab cutout that they all had to go through, and unfortunately all these guys were going to bang their heads as they were going to come up through, and so that became a thing. You had to number all of your stairs on your on the section to avoid that and that stair was being made out of solid jarrah, and it was all being made by this extraordinary craftsman, and we had to go and change all of the dimensions, and it was all being designed so you could march up beautifully and not skip in the middle or anything, so that the beautiful rhythm of the march would work, and we had to sort of change it at a very late stage. And we never made that mistake again, right, as a whole office. So really important. So the way that we demonstrated evidence in our project folders that we'd done something is we would write in red pen on the drawing, and then we would get a highlighter and we would highlight across the red pen and we'd say, I did it. Checked it, did it. And that was the evidence that the drawing had been updated and included. And then once I'd done it, I had to come over here and sign off and say, yep, I did it. It's all good. And then the director would sign off and say, yep, I checked that Jane did it, and she did, and I've spot checked it, and it looks like she's done all the things that she said she did. So it's got that double check. And so all good quality assurance systems would have that kind of that double check. So, so evidence that the task or responsibility has been assigned to someone appropriately qualified, that the task has been completed, and the task has been checked by someone else that it's been complete, and evidence that the process has been followed. So it's all about this kind of producing this kind of evidence. There's also part of the quality system also included a lot of stuff for version control of BCA and Australian standards. And that kind of becomes really important because we need to meet those Australian standards. Our legal requirement is to meet the Australian standard that's referenced in the BCA at the time that we did the building. Okay, and that became really important in that ladder thing. I had to go back to all of the versions of the ladder code to look at what the ladder code said at the time that the ladder had been designed. Yeah, and then be able to say, no, it wasn't done in accordance with the Australian standards, so yep, it's our responsibility to rectify the situation. I don't know how you go back to that date in the current digital systems that people use, but I think it's pretty good to have those kind of hard copies in the office as well. You need to always be making sure that you're working with the most current version for current design work. You need to keep those old versions to make sure that if something happens, a legal case happens, you're able to go back and check whether you actually did it correctly. And that's done by digital subscription now, so you'd need systems in place to allow you to go back. All right. Now, this idea of being a professional, so making sure that the task is assigned to someone adequately qualified to undertake that task. Okay. Now, you all be aware that we just all went through accreditation here at UC, and I was running that process. And really that process is about creating evidence for the registration body that we're training you in accordance with what they need so that you can become a professional that knows what they need to do. And so you can sort of slot in at the right experience level within a quality framework. Okay, so the quality assurance system and the registration system, it's got a series of domains that you need to that each thing is kind of categorized under. It's got certain things that you need to produce, that you need to have knowledge of, certain things you need to have skills in, and others that you need application and knowledge. Now there's 70 of these items.
73?
70? Maybe 73. Anyway, 37 of them 37 get done at uni. So just a little bit over half, and the rest happen in the profession, which is why you need that, minimum 2 years experience, logbook, blah, 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 because kind of like 5 years at uni get you 37 worth, and the other, 33 or so you need to get in those next 2 years. So it's pretty intensive, and it's why it's pretty hard to get registered in 2 years. It's possible. I did it. But you need to have, your office needs to be really focused on supporting you to have the right roles and experience to allow you to do it. Okay, and what you'll notice here is these things just cross over almost exactly with the quality assurance system. Right, so it says the design response incorporates assessment of relevant legislation, codes and industry standards. Right? And so they're sort of checking that that quality system is checking that we're behaving professionally in accordance with our professional responsibilities and making sure that we did those things and that we can produce evidence that we did those things. So, yeah. And of course it's another example of a quality assurance system, but in a university context. All right. So why do we bother? I think quality assurance systems should allow us to work efficiently and I guess help us to reduce skills gaps. Like, you guys are all young, you're starting to work in offices. You're like, I don't know what I need to do. I don't know what form I need to fill in. I don't know what to do next. I'm not sure. Well, this sort of allows you to know what to do next and to be kind of a lot more proactive. So a good quality assurance system will allow you to have some confidence and to help fill some of those skill gaps as you're learning. They help us to trigger when we really should be thinking and when we should be doing some more work and some more research. They help us to think. They help us to trigger what we should be thinking at each project stage. When we need to check certain authorities, when we need to number the stairs on the treads and risers, at what point does that happen in the process? And they're one of the ways that we're automating our future, I guess. They're one of those kind of methods for automating the future. And I guess a good quality assurance system still allows for new ideas and for individual responses to design, but with really carefully planned processes that help to reduce errors and mistakes. And they should really be about, streamlining workflow. I guess the who and why in most residential clients are not going to require you to have a QA process. However, it's probably going to make you sleep better at night if you've got one, because you'll feel more confidence in what you're doing. But public works, large scale projects and commercial clients will require them. And as I said, a really good quality system is going to help sleep at night. It's going to make you feel comfortable in the work that you're doing, and it's going to reduce your anxiety level because you know that you're following and you're doing all of the things that you need to do. Because all of these things, it's a lot of things to need to remember, and it's probably too many things to remember. The list is too big that we need to do. The task is too complex as architects, and having a really good system to help support you and give you some confidence in what you're doing can be really helpful. Yeah. So that big thing is about producing evidence, not necessarily quality, but producing evidence. Yeah. And yeah, so it's a really good system to help you work creatively, but also to work professionally. That's it. My time's up.
couple of questions. And this is kind of relying the fact that the last time I was involved in a huge project. What does PSP and FSP mean?
So I guess in most offices there'll be some designated design stages. In most Australian offices, it's a preliminary sketch plan and a final sketch plan. We always had a design studies stage prior to that, and design studies required us to test options and confirm the budget. So we wouldn't really start designing properly until we had tested some options and tested the budget, and then we would sign off that we were ready to go and actually start producing design work. And so those key stages would allow us to make sure that we had confidence to go forward and that the client would too. Yeah. And sometimes there was also a feasibility study prior to that. So we go feasibility, where we might develop design options which could generate a budget, for example. In that design studies phase, we would do design options, but we would also start producing what we call data sheets, which was another term that would have shown up there a lot. And for most of the projects I worked on, they were complex public works, and so they could be perioperative, all the ins and outs coming in and out of operating theatres or emergency departments or secure psychiatric. And so it really mattered to those clients whether there was a basin that you could wash your hands at, like an infection control station, or whether there was a sink where you could wash stuff up. And you weren't allowed to wash your hands in a sink, and you weren't allowed to wash stuff up in a basin. And so it really mattered exactly everything that was going to be provided in every single room. And so we'd also have data sheets production at that stage, and the client would also approve that, sign it off, budget, in a big feedback loop right the way through.
I think this is interesting because my clients are all residential clients. So really, like the sketch design is like you do sign off at the end, but it's just a kind of latest version. So version 6 or what have you. And the starting off thing is really important. It's fine when you've got an educated client who does it as work, but your domestic clients quite often they end up forgetting what they told you, and then it's important to keep track of this process so that you can remind them that they've already approved something and that they can't change it anymore. They do the responsibilities. Let me ask you, with the ladder thing is interesting because what you're saying essentially is that the ladders, the roof access ladders, were designed to a standard where they were permissible.
Yes, so I should just tell you what actually happened. So ladders were designed in accordance with the standard. If you read the whole standard, so for a vertical ladder, you're allowed to do vertical ladders in a number of contexts, but right at the end of the standard, it says vertical ladders are only permissible if the work cover or work safe authority in that state has approved it. And guess what? Work cover and work safe in the ACT are a retroactive organisation. They are not a proactive organisation. So they will only approve a vertical ladder if they can see it fixed in place, on site, installed. They will not sign off on the design drawings. So you cannot get in the ACT, or back, a few years ago, you could not get a vertical ladder approved in accordance with the standard because the appropriate work safe authority in the state would not sign off on a design drawing. Yeah.
So what happened then is that they came out to look at the ladders after they were...
Yeah, and they said, the union that was working at that building said, we want ladder cages installed, which is the the protective barrier around that you normally only have to install when the ladder is over 6 metres or something like that. And we had to go at our own cost, replace all of the ladders out there, and at our own cost produce a number of solutions, this was with the ladder cage, and this is at a different angle, and blah blah.
So at the cost of the firm or the cost of the firm's insurers?
The firm's insurers, yeah. Anyway, goes back on the checklist. Do not make that mistake again. Yeah.
So how would you have gotten?
And the project architect for that job hadn't worked at the office for 10 years. So, I was looking back at backups of drawings, old tape backups. I was looking back at old design reports, all of that backup stuff, and keeping your documents in order, and allowed me to actually go back and track back exactly what had happened and whether we had that approval or not, and what have you. Yeah.
Questions? It's not by endless questions. I'm just giving you guys a chance. So the process basically is that a set of drawings are produced by an architect or by someone producing the drawings. They then go up to upper level or across it to someone else to check that.
Yep.
Who marks it up in red.
Yep.
That then goes back to the person who produced the drawings, who then makes the changes and then marks it off with a
yellow highlighter. Yeah. That's the same in most offices. You do the check.
Yes.
Yeah.
To demonstrate that they've made the change.
But even in the case where if I'm the only person on the job, I would still leave my notes and what I've been doing all over the drawings in red, and then go back and yellow them myself so that I left a record. Yeah.
So what that means then is that all of these markups and demonstrations of the markup being attended to were then kept as part of the job's document, so that you show that you've actually done your job.
And we did all the markup had to be done on the A3s, because who wants to store all of that? So you don't want to have giant amounts of storage. If you're doing all of your markups on A1s, sometimes we'll print out A1s, but we'd leave the markup evidence on the A3. And if you do your scale right, then a 1 to 100 drawing will be 1 to 200 at A3. So it was always to scale the drawing.
One last thing is never one last thing, is it? But tell me about backing workup. So how many versions did you already talk about that when I was not talking?
Yeah, maybe. So backing workup, we did talk about that. So off-site, on-site, and they're on repeated backups, and then but then also some fixed point in time ones. Even just recently, an enormous body of work was done at UC a few years ago, and I went to go into the folder where that work should be. Not there. But thankfully, UC has a fantastic backup system, and those months of work and the folder that had been deleted was actually on the old tape drive. It took, the IT guys a couple of weeks to go back to the tape drive and retrieve it, but they were actually able to go back. They had to go back 10 tapes back, and ta-da, there it was. And I was very grateful, because the work had been produced in 2015 and all of the other backups had been done, but they were backing up stuff that didn't exist anymore. So you've got to have your right over backups, that's your regular one, plus your point in time backup that makes sure that you don't lose that stuff. And sometimes you think, that job's done, I don't need to worry about it. And then they come back, that repeat client that comes back and back and back again at 5-year intervals, and you need to be able to go back and see what the work that you've done previously for them.
And just for the record, out of the 37 competencies that we had to fulfill for accreditation, we fulfilled 30 of them completely as a school, and 5 of them part. So, and that's what led to our 5-year accreditation because of this system, and of course because of Jane's great work in organising it in a way which could be tracked and mapped all the way through, backwards and forwards.
So the frustrating thing about the accreditation system is they are seriously a bunch of bureaucrats producing paperwork, and I wasn't allowed to provide, the roadmap to our system. I had to produce the evidence in accordance with their system. So,
and just as a point of comparison, the week after an accreditation visiting panel went to the University of Melbourne to review their architecture program, and Melbourne Uni got 2 years because they started this whole process 2 months before the visitors came, rather than in our case, which we started 9 months before the visit.
Yeah.
So there is a lot to be said about getting to know a system and working with it to make sure that taking things seriously.
Yeah, and making sure the evidence is in your work. And all the way along, I was like, they changed the system as well. We're the first people to ever use the current system. They did that. They finalised that system after we'd finished teaching you. And we still, I was looking at the evidence all the way through, and I was like, you know what, I think we're going to be okay because I think the evidence is there in your work that we meet that criteria. And it was, and we were able to collect it and prove that we met the criteria. And so having that evidence in your work is really, really important. But all of the criteria, probably for all of the 37, was just in the checklist that they're all just things that you just have to do as an architect. And pretty basic stuff. What was it, all of the things that John teaches you each week, I expect.
All right, let's thank Jane already. Excellent. Now, let me go to the recording. Stop.